Coming up on this edition of the Black Vault Radio, retired police officer Lieutenant Tim McMillan steps into the vault. We speak about his amazing background on the force, an interaction during a routine stop that changed his life, a personal UFO encounter which piqued his interest into the unknown, and finally, his research in obtaining the official police records about the raid of United Nuclear, the Michigan-based business of Bob Lazar. This incident was profiled in Jeremy Corbell's recent documentary on Lazar, and Lieutenant McMillan weighs in on what he found out.
The FBI had some reasonable belief that there may have been illegal or banned toxic substances in the facility. It was not a benign inquiry of, hey man, we're going to go by here, try to get some sales records and, go from there. It was enough that made the officer want to check. But this, definitely was a large-scale coordinated event, which is further confirmed in the report. There was enough odd details in that report that some people were going to go, aha, it proves it. He does have element 115, or he did work there because there's all of this production. But at the same time, others were going to go, aha, this is all, related to this criminal investigation.
All that and much more. So stay tuned. The Black Vault Radio is about to begin. More than 20 years ago, I began a journey, my quest for the truth. My name is John Greenewald, and I have hammered the United States government with Freedom of Information Act requests trying to get answers. I have more than 2 million pages of declassified documents for you to download at theblackvault.com. Now, I attempt to dive even deeper and talk to some of the most brilliant minds on this planet. No government secret is off limits, and no question is off the table. All I aim for is the truth. This is the Black Vault Radio. That's right, everybody. This is the Black Vault Radio. I am your host, John Greenewald Jr. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and making this your podcast and radio show of choice. I know there are millions, billions, and trillions of options out there with all of those different radio shows. If it is your first time listening in, you're in for a great show. I'm really excited about today's guest simply because, number one, he is an amazing individual and someone who serves as a role model in, every community that's out there. But on top of that, he has made a discovery that is new, it's original, and quite frankly, it's newsworthy. He is retired police officer Lieutenant Tim McMillan, and he's coming up to talk about a public records request that he did, and he got the police records related to the raid of Bob Lazar's establishment, his business. Now, if you don't know what that is or what it means, we'll go into a little bit more detail in the TBV Dialogue segment. But in short, tying into Jeremy Corbell's film on Bob Lazar, Jeremy made an appearance on this program along with George Knapp. It remains one of the top downloaded episodes of this program. They talked about the film and what had happened. Now, what we didn't talk about was this raid on Bob Lazar's establishment. Now, this was a key point in the documentary, and I respect the fact that Jeremy is an independent filmmaker. We didn't want to come out and just kind of blow the whole thing in the show, so I respected that. And as much as I wanted to ask and even push Jeremy on what that was all about, I respected the fact that some things we wanted to keep off the air. That way, everybody had an opportunity to see that for themselves. So that was something that I agreed to before the program, but also agreed with. I think that Jeremy deserves everybody to see his film and make their own decision on how they interpret the Bob Lazar story and how Jeremy presented it. Well, my guest, Lieutenant McMillan, decided to go after police documents related to that raid. And he got responsive records. No one, as far as I know, has ever done that, never got these records, and he is here to give his expert opinion on what it all means. I'm eager to pick his brain as a law enforcement officer. He has an amazing career, and like I said, serves as really a role model for our community, away from the Bob Lazar finding. I'm talking about, just ignore all of that. This man, it's an honor for me to have him on the program because he really is a role model for the kids, a role model that we can all look up to. But honestly, it's a role model for other police officers on the force that serve, that wear blue from coast to coast. He's an amazing human being. I'm looking forward to talking to him. Now, it's an important news day. Today is April 18th, 2019. At least that's when I'm recording this episode and dropping it online. You may not be listening to it on this day, but in addition to my guest and his news, this is the day the Mueller report was released to the world. Now, as I'm recording this, it's only a couple hours in. All of the news agencies are scrambling to read this 400-plus page report. There's some interesting things in it, but of course, AG Barr, William Barr, the Attorney General, came out, had a press conference prior to the report's release, and of course, that is just surrounded with controversy, conspiracy, cover-up allegations, you name it, it's there. They're throwing mud, as you would quite expect. But it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle that you sit on. It's an important day. There is about a 2-year wait that we've had to sit and wonder what Robert Mueller would come up with. Well, this 400-page report is exactly what he came up with. No Russian collusion, undetermined on whether or not President Trump obstructed justice, but there was no evidence of it. But again, that 400-plus page report has an awful lot in it that, as I speak to you right now, everybody is going through. Now, the reason why I bring this up is the Black Vault has always striven to do, what I do with it, is to offer a unedited, uneditorialized outlet for documents such as these. Now, if you are watching any of the news channels and they've got printed copies of the Mueller report and they're trying to tell you what's in it and they'll read it and you barely get what they're reading, but more so they're just telling you what to think about it, get away from that. If you're really interested in it, read the report itself. And until Mueller comes out and says, this is not what I wrote, just know that this is the word of Robert Mueller, and his report is out there for all of you to read. Now, as the government has proven time and time again when they release information like this, there's two things that are always a pretty much guarantee. The first thing is they release it like on a holiday weekend, and voila, here we are on Easter weekend. This is Thursday the 18th, as I mentioned. Tomorrow is Good Friday. It's Easter weekend. Sunday is Easter. So, of course, news cycles slow way down. That's always a guarantee on releases like this because it is always on late on a Friday night or a holiday weekend. And, well, they came through yet again. But the second thing that's a guarantee, and this was something that I made, a few headlines with last year, is that the JFK assassination documents were released in the same way. They were unsearchable. They were PDF documents that had the content there, but you couldn't find words. And when they blanket you with hundreds, or in that specific example, hundreds of thousands of pages, it's very hard to find what you're looking for. I mean, not everybody has the time, like these newscasters and reporters, to sit down and get paid to go through it, and they get paid to tell you what they think. So what I did was, the moment that Mueller report was released, I started a conversion process called OCR, Optical Character Recognition. Not to be geeky, but what that means essentially is that it scans every single page on my system, scans every single page, it converts the image to something that's searchable, and takes every character and where it's able to be read, converts it into text. Now, it's still a PDF and you still see it in its unedited form. But now you can actually use the find feature in Adobe Acrobat. So let's say you're looking for the word, Trump, or collusion, or Russia, or Putin, or Trump Jr., whatever it may be. You press Control F or whatever your shortcut key is, type it in, and it will scan that PDF and bring it up to you. If you do it with the version the government releases, it won't work because they didn't do it right. That's a pretty standard Acrobat feature when you create PDFs, and yet the government has a knack for not doing that. It's like they're trying to be transparent, but doing everything possible to make it near impossible to make it easy. That they won't do searchable PDFs, that they won't do these very simple procedures. So I did, and I converted that entire 400 plus page document. I offer on the blackvault.com both versions. If you want just the version the DOJ, the Department of Justice, released, I put it on there. No conversion, no editing. It just comes with the header that tags the Black Vault on it. That is standard for any PDF downloaded from my site. Everything else untouched. But I also offer that second version. That's the version that's OCR converted. That means that you can search it, download it. The content is unedited, but again, the technological feature has been added after my system was done converting it. Now, I bring all of this up for two reasons. One, I want you to know it's there. That way you don't have to deal with all of the editorialized versions of, all of the news channels telling you what to think. Now, if you really care, you can make up your own mind. But the second part that I want to tell you, why I wanted to tell you this, is keep this in mind about government transparency and how the government operates. Because by releasing this report, the search engines also don't have all of those keywords indexed in it. Now there's a longer technical explanation, but kind of the nutshell version is that when you put PDFs online and they're not converted the way I converted them, they generally don't spider or index in the same way. That way, those keywords don't come up in searches. Makes it, yet again, very inaccessible and essentially blind when it comes to search engines and archiving this material. I have always aimed to change that, or at least to rectify that, when these documents are released. So all of those are on the blackvault.com. I will also link them directly from the show notes page at www.theblackvault.com/show notes. In addition to the Mueller report pages, I have it archived on multiple secured, dedicated servers to handle the traffic. As I am talking right now, my traffic has increased about 6 or 7 times the normal size of traffic. And that is traffic being split in between 2 servers. So essentially it's 14 times plus the normal load. So there is a lot of stuff going on there. But be patient. It right now, everything is downloading clean. You'll be able to get it. But in addition to linking those documents, I will also link over to Lieutenant McMillan's find with the Bob Lazar raid and the police documents that he got through official channels using open access records requests or what are called state sunshine laws. We'll explain all of that coming up in the TBV Dialogue segment. So stay tuned. Short break. We'll come right back with Lieutenant Tim McMillan. On this episode's TBV Dialogue segment, I welcome retired Police Lieutenant Tim McMillan. Lieutenant McMillan became a Garden City police officer in Georgia at the age of 21. He spent 15 years on the force, with roles that included being a patrol officer, investigator, crime scene technician, canine handler, sergeant, and finally a lieutenant and assistant patrol commander. Lieutenant McMillan's academic background includes psychology and mathematics, with degrees from Southern New Hampshire University. In the summer of 2018, still steadfast in his dedication to make a positive impact in others' lives, Lieutenant McMillan retired from law enforcement to become a full-time civil rights investigator and advocate with the Claiborne firm out of Savannah, Georgia. He runs a very popular Facebook page which reaches millions of people every week, and he's been showcased on more than 150 different media organizations in 27 countries. He also provides lectures for numerous events, TED Talks, and much, much more. Let me welcome to the Black Vault Radio, Lieutenant Tim McMillan.
Hey, how's it going, John? Good to hear from you.
It is going very, very well, and thank you so much. Now, before my introduction and the early parts of the show, I know you weren't on the line yet. I want to say this to you, looking into your background away from your discovery of the local police department's Bob Lazar raid documents, which we're going to get into in a little bit. You really are a role model for communities from coast to coast and around the world, but also for other police officers. And before we get into those Bob Lazar documents, I wanted to tell you that you have those you're reaching those millions of people because you really do serve as this role model. And I want you to tell everybody a little bit about your background in what you are currently involved in and what you do, if I can kind of prod a little bit in your background.
Sure. And first of all, thank you very much. I mean, it's very humbling, nice things you have to say, and I hope that whatever I do has a positive impact. But I never really wanted to be a cop growing up. I tell people this, I wanted to be a research cognitive psychologist or an astronomer, two vastly different fields, but I liked mysteries, and I thought those were the two greatest mysteries out there. And so, some very tragic fate kind of changed life's path for me. And with the death, I had two friends who were murdered in Savannah in 2002. And it was, a very emotional moment. And so, I woke up one day shortly after this and said, I want to do something in this world. The two types of people. People will say someone needs to do something, and someone who says I'm going to do something. And I wanted to be the latter person. And so, I ended up enrolling in the police academy and actually turned 21 in the police academy. So, wasn't the rip-roaring 21st birthday like a lot of people probably have had. But I ended up working at a department right outside of Savannah for 15 years. Was very fortunate to serve in a lot of different roles, worked for some great people. And so I was fortunate because I got in a great environment that kind of grew me in that position well. And ultimately was made lieutenant, which is at our agency was the assistant patrol commander, but was kind of like the night watchman. I worked permanent night shift, and I was the primary law enforcement authority for our city after hours. And all of this was once again kind of changed for me, which has got me to the point I am here now. After October 2016. I was getting off late one early morning, about 6 a.m., which was about 3 hours later than I was supposed to be working. And I ended up pulling someone over who I assumed at the time was a drunk driver, based on their driving and being all over the road. As fate would have it, it turned out to just be a young man, an 18-year-old, Brandon was his name, 18-year-old African-American boy, who he was just texting and driving. And it wasn't, he hadn't been drinking. And when I walked up to the car and saw him, admittedly, at this point in my career in law enforcement, I wasn't pulling a whole lot of people over. I'll go ahead and put it out there. I never was big on writing tickets. It's kind of like being a dentist. Nobody wants to see you, And so I hadn't stopped a lot of people. And, this is right on the heels of a lot of the kind of the social climate that was going on with race relations and law enforcement. And for me, I had always approached the community, the same way with everything. I just came to people. I expected good interaction with everybody I come in contact with. And so my interactions were very positive. And so the stuff that I saw on the news and everything, that could have been Afghanistan. It goes on the other side of the world to me. However, when I saw this young man, when I saw Brandon face to face, and I saw real fear and terror in his eyes, that really took me back. And I can't stress enough, because you know how people are. There's always negative Nellies in this world. I know you deal with that in your line of work. A lot of people, he was just nervous because he was hiding something. No, I was for about 5 years, I was a canine handler, street level felony interdiction officer. So I dealt a lot with this kind of stuff. That was real fear. He was afraid of me because I was a police officer. And I remember in my interaction with him, I've said that, at that moment, I wasn't a cop anymore. I was, a father, a husband, a human being. Brandon, it didn't matter what color his skin was. And I've said to people, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, I looked in his brown eyes, and they looked the same as my oldest son. I mean, it was a spiritual moment in a way. Kind of a negative way, but suddenly have this interaction and realize kind of human beings, we all shouldn't feel this way with each other.
Yeah.
And so later on that morning, and I didn't write Brandon a ticket and even explain to him, I just didn't want him to get hurt. I didn't want him to text and drive and get in a wreck.
And that was why you pulled him over? Because he was texting.
Correct.
Wasn't drunk. He was texting. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. The more irony of this entire story is both Brandon and I ended up traveling away. He was headed to work. I was headed home. Neither of us would have gone because the road was closed off, because the reason I was getting off so late is we had a tragic fatal car accident. And so, this is fresh on my mind, driving safety. I had just seen the consequences of that. But either way, me and Brandon both shouldn't have been going the way we were. And it's just one of these kind of fated scenarios.
Yeah.
And so, but it did. It had such an emotional impact on me. I had a hard time getting to sleep that morning. And I did like every other good red-blooded American does when they, have something they want to share, they go to social media. And I ended up just, kind of relating that stop and trying to pour that emotion out and just saying, this, has to stop. Young people shouldn't be afraid of the police. And equally, at the same time, I wasn't mad at the media. I wasn't mad at, all of these different people that often get blamed. It didn't matter where the source of Brandon's fear came from. It existed, and it's real.
Yeah.
And I respected that. I do. And so I posted on Facebook, didn't even know that it was public. This was from my private Facebook. And went to sleep, and literally 6 hours of not enough sleep later, I woke up and I discovered my post had been shared, I think, close to 500,000 times by that point.
Yeah, it went super viral, your story and your feelings about this.
Immediately.
Yeah.
And so I was thrust into this whole new world, and I started receiving messages from people all over the country, people in minority communities all over the country, thanking me and kind of sharing their own personal stories. And I thought, man, it was it's still, when you put it in context, a very emotional moment, because there was real pain behind some people's messages. And I think oftentimes people get caught up in the, desire to be correct or wanting to fight it out, and realize that, people have real emotional feelings, and there's real situations, and those come from somewhere. And so they're not just make-believe. And so I just started listening to people. And, the other bit of irony of this is this all happened 2 days before the Savannah area got hit by Hurricane Matthew. And so I got recalled for hurricane duty, lost power, and for close to a week, I didn't really know what all had happened until I got cell service and everything and discovered it was now in the millions of shares, and, celebrities like Steve Harvey, politicians like Ben Carson, people were talking about me.
Yeah.
and I was like, what? And
when you wrote it up, not to interrupt you, when you wrote it up, you had that wasn't your intent. You were just kind of venting on your own personal page and go to sleep. And then this thing is, global.
Yes. Yeah, Lord, no. In fact, if I look back at it now, there's even little grammar areas where I'm like, oh, my gosh. And Lord, no. In fact, I even jokingly tell people in the post that got shared and everything, my profile picture was me and my wife that my wife had used before, and because she didn't want her employer and friends to see my shirt. The shirt I was wearing was the old Cousin Eddie from A Christmas Vacation, said the shitter's full, which she had she had blurred that out. So before I stole it for my own picture, luckily that was blurred out. But I mean, that just kind of contrast. No. I never, and admittedly, I say that a lot of the issues that I talk about now, or deal with now, I was willfully ignorant to. It's easy to go on about our days. If your life's okay, so what? So no, Lord, no, I never expected to be kind of thrust in that world. However, it was very much like the reason I became a cop. I didn't want to choose that path either, but I felt like that's, that was my vocation. That's where I'm supposed to go.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, since then, I spent 2 years while still working for the force, traveling around just talking to people, in places that people hear on the news are scary, inner city Chicago, Washington, D.C., all these areas, and just heard people's stories. Even people that said, I hate the police. And I don't hate you, man. But why do you feel that way?
Yeah.
And it was very eye-opening. And so, in summer of last year, I had an opportunity to kind of do this full time. So now for a private firm, will investigate civil rights complaints that people make, and also have the opportunity to do some speeches and stuff. I just came back from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with the Sheriff's Department there. Great group to speak to. Essentially now I try to be an intermediary to help, with any community issues that relate to law enforcement and the community. By trying to listen and understand both sides, because I do understand both sides, and hopefully be able to take down some of those guarded walls from both sides and say, I get this, but let me tell you this other perspective.
Yeah.
I respect what you say. Let me give you this, and it's been a very positive experience. I have received a lot of feedback from that. I would say everything in that avenue definitely trumps anything else. Next to being a father, some of the things I've received, a woman who messaged me from a nursing home told me that she had read some of the things that I had shared, blog posts from my site, and she was in a nursing home, but told me that she had realized that she was racist her entire life. But after reading some of these things, she realized it was wrong. And she wanted to thank me because she knew that someday, she would pass away. At least she wouldn't pass away racist. And I was like, wow.
That's powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I'm man enough to admit, when I read that message, I had to take a minute. And I got choked up because, that's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
But,
I know.
That's my backstory there.
Yeah, no, and it's an amazing backstory, and I wanted to take a couple minutes for you to be able to tell it, because it is an amazing story. I'm going to only disagree with you on one thing. You said you didn't blame the media, and I'm here to say that I probably would. I mean, my entire family are huge supporters of those that wear blue, so to speak. We have a lot of friends that are part of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department that come to our home quite often. They're very good friends, also part of the Los Angeles Police Department. And you hear stories that the media doesn't profile that is so amazing. And your story is so amazing. Now, obviously, you've been profiled quite a bit, so that might be a bad example. But sadly, the nightly news, you hear the bad stories all the time, and that's right. What more so goes viral. And it's encouraging to me to hear that your story, the positive part, not only went viral, but created such an emotion in you that I want to now ask: Did that interaction with Brandon, is that what made you retire from the force and get into civil rights advocacy and being a civil rights investigator? Was that a turning point ultimately for you then?
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. And real quick, just to go back to what you just said, I agree wholeheartedly. I want to caveat when I said don't blame the media. What I meant by that was, in my opinion, the media is a business. I take things for what they are, and and they give people what they want to consume. Yeah. And so, what my saying that and saying don't blame the media means, don't just point the finger at the media and then not do something yourself. Turn off that then. Turn it off. Don't let that be marketable, and also don't let the fact there are a host of things. We go into the political things that are politicized. There's a lot of things that propagate issues with people. However, don't just settle on blaming them and let that prevent you from being open to listening to somebody else or open to somebody's experience. And that's what I mean by that. No, you're absolutely right. They do. And I'm big on trying to remind people, and that's why I like, civil rights investigation, is to remind people about their own power or significance. It's supposed to be the great thing about a democracy. We're in charge. Don't forget that.
That's right. Well, I appreciate you telling that background and giving everybody an idea of who you are. And obviously you have gotten into looking into some of these cases, namely the Bob Lazar case. Now I'll bring this up because it's in, public forums. It seems like you frequent and are very interested in UFO-like topics. How did you get into that? Is that just a curiosity or based on experience that you had, or how did that come about?
Well, interestingly enough, just like everything else in my life, my thrust down the rabbit hole of ufology wasn't something I wanted, but I am willing to say, and I've said it before, in December 2011, I had my own experience. I saw something that to date I do not have a prosaic explanation for. It was, by definition, an unexplained flying object. Was it extraterrestrial? I have no idea. Was it what it was? I don't know. In this particular case, I actually was with another friend who was a police officer as well. And so I had my, I was here with great credible witnesses, cops and military. And so I at least knew I wasn't crazy because she saw it. And in this particular case, being very new to the UFO field or anything, I had stumbled upon MUFON and reported it. And the local MUFON investigator here in Georgia contacted me and would end up finding in their reporting that someone else had reported the exact same object.
Oh, wow.
Coming from the same direction, roughly 15, 20 minutes before we saw it. And so it was real. That was the thing. It was real. And so, that kind of spurred my interest into it. Now, I take an atypical approach, I would say, and have largely stayed in the shadows for the better part of the last year, or 8 years. I've only since kind of come out publicly in forums or talking on podcasts like this within this year, because mostly my interest goes back to my academic background, which is in cognitive psychology, consciousness and perception. And so for me, I think the thing that I'm most interested in when it comes to sightings of anomalous things is, there's enough episodic or anecdotal evidence that I have come across, including my own experience, to say something is there. There is limited physical evidence that also suggests there's something real.
Yeah.
But there's never enough that gives you any kind of scientific conclusion, and that's kind of consistent all the way across the board. And so I'm very interested, I kind of approach it from the belief, probably a tip of the hat to people like Jacques Vallée, who, it's something. And what it is, I don't know. And the perception, cognitive side of me, also questions that, when we see a flying saucer, let's say, or whatever shape people see, is that what we're really seeing? Just being aware of our brain's ability to how it processes the environment, how we perceive stimuli in the environment. It's very dependent on, our existing body of knowledge and how we can relate it. And so if we come across something in our environment we have no point of reference to,
yeah.
It's kind of like pareidolia, where you see the face on Mars, that kind of stuff. Our brains try to make sense of it. And so, I've always been interested in saying, it's real. What is it really? And so that's kind of always been my approach to it, which has, taking somewhat of a scientific approach, that involves first disproving that it's not something metaphysical, let's say, and, looking at a lot of the nuts and bolts reports, as it's called, And, so for the past 8 years, both independently on my own, just kind of talking to people or looking into stuff, I've also been silently scouring the archives out there, and it's an interesting topic.
Yeah,
I enjoy the pursuit.
It's a fascinating topic. Let me ask you one last thing about your own personal sighting. I know you said that you submitted it to MUFON. With your police investigative background, did you just kind of rely on MUFON investigating it? Did you try and find an answer? And the second part of the question is, was it ever solved? Did you guys ever figure out what it was, or to this day it remains a UFO?
Yeah, well, all of the above.
Okay.
The MUFON investigator I kind of relied on initially because I was very new to this.
Mm-hmm.
How do you check into this? So I had to crash course myself, not only in, I guess, the modern accepted techniques of UFO investigation, if there is such a thing, but also look at the mathematics and science behind it. That's my background, and so to try to interpret this. And so I did try to look at it from that perspective. I mean, the object that we saw, would have been, if it was a solid structure, 3 football fields big. And wow. So, yeah, it's very difficult to try to say that's a misidentified, aircraft that we
Sure.
know about, terrestrial. Yeah. And so I don't have any point of reference there. In terms of the MUFON investigation, the conclusion was it's a UFO. In fact, that probably, they're telling me that is what really jumped me off down the rabbit hole, because I said, well, what is it? Yeah, it's a UFO. Well, what do you mean? That's not going to work for me. I said I like solving mysteries because I can't stand them, and so to this day I don't know what it is. I don't know what it was. Other than I will say it came at a point in my life. I'm very intrigued by, I mentioned Jacques Vallée. I really enjoyed, I just finished American Cosmic by Dr. Paluska, mm-hmm. who I really enjoy their approaches to it, and can relate in some extent that my sighting came at a time when maybe I needed it. It was a motivating factor. In fact, my life would dramatically change for the better shortly after that. And so it's interesting enough, and that's the site that I have such recently created to kind of share my musings on my journey in this topic is called Chasing the Coyote's Tail, because the coyote, being the trickster, it appears to act like that. And so if nothing else, I say I enjoy the chase. I think that that's what keeps me going.
You all listening can check out his new blog, Chasing the Coyote's Tail, at www.coyotestail.com. Now, as of the recording of this episode, you have one blog post up there, and you have started with a doozy of a first blog. And that comes to the scope of what this show is all about, because you and I chatted and actually just met in the last week or two. And I was really struck by your approach, not only by your background, but your approach. I mean, you seem like just kind of a no-nonsense guy, which resonates with me at the highest level. And so I think you and I clicked right off the bat. And unbeknownst to me, after our conversation, and you were awesome to note this in your blog, and I really do appreciate that, where you had stated, and I'll read it, that. Well, let me read the first paragraph, and it's not me trying to toot my horn. I want to read this for a reason. You say, up to this point, the extent of my involvement in exploring anomalous aerial phenomena for the sake of common colloquial familiarity, wow, I can't talk today, UFOs, was solely limited to my academic and advocationist experience in research cognitive psychology. However, inspired by a recent conversation with the creator and curator of the Black Vault website and author of the recently published book, Inside the Black Vault, The Government's UFO Secrets Revealed, John Greenewald, I found myself deciding to proverbially throw my hat down a different avenue and employ my professional experience as a criminal investigator to examine the UFO phenomena. The only reason I'm reading that is to say thank you, because that paragraph there, which I didn't do it justice with my bad reading, it is exactly why I do what I do. And I have always advocated for people to do that. You can remove my name from that paragraph and put in any other name in there. And the fact that whomever inspired you to do this, to take the next step and to go somewhere that no one else has gone and get documents, is to the heart of why I do the Black Vault. So I want to say thank you, not only for saying that, because of our conversation, but just doing it. I mean, that is very, very admirable. There's too many blogs out there that really just kind of regurgitate stuff that's already been around. They put their own spin, but you went out and did something, what I call original research, which is kind of a rarity nowadays. So my kudos to you, because based on that, you go out, file what's called a, there's different terms for different states, but essentially every state has a sunshine law. Now, on this program, I talk about the Freedom of Information Act quite a bit. I've used it for 22 years. That is the federal level where you can access information through the Freedom of Information Act. But what's not as commonly known is that every state at the state level, they're not subject to that federal law, but they have equivalent laws through the Sunshine Acts, Sunshine Laws, Open Access Records Acts, whatever you want to call it. Again, it differs from state to state. You have a lot of experience with that. I do not. So before we get into that document, tell everybody what exactly are these Sunshine Laws and how does that kind of differ from the Freedom of Information Act?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and it's funny is the only thing I know about Freedom of Information Act is thanks to you. So I genuinely appreciate those kind sentiments you just said, because legitimately someone who from 15 years old took it upon themselves to do something that is inspirational. So if anybody's listening, I can't reiterate again. Take me and you both out of it, but people you come across in life who do something and are doing something. I mean, man, follow that lead. But anyway, I digress.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Each state has some type of freedom of information law per state. And you're right. They come by different names. I guess in California it's the Sunshine Law. Some of them in Michigan, which is where the Bob Lazar report came out of, it is called FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. Here in Georgia, we have the Georgia Open Records Act. So each state has their own state-level mandate that's just like the Freedom of Information Act federally, where public entities that are funded by tax dollars are required to provide information to anyone requesting the public just the same way you would with FOIA. There may be some slight cost involved depending on how much documents, but my experience in that, this is a process that I use considerably now as a private investigator, because I don't have the access to all those fun, police tools I used to. However, the information you can get is great. I mean, I don't think people really realize that it's public information. It's out there for the people. And unlike the federal FOIA, which I'm sure you can testify to, it can be a very sluggish, arduous process.
Yes.
Sometimes it take months, and even I've heard you relent, years to get back something.
In some cases, more than a decade.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. Whereas at the state, local level, and so, that means actually, submitting a request to a local agency or county or the state, depending on who falls under the jurisdiction of what you're looking for, that responsiveness can be, minutes or hours. I mean, oftentimes I can pick up the phone and call somebody, or, once you've already submitted some requests, they know, yeah, sure, we'll send you that right over.
Wow.
And so, I mean, it is extremely responsive. And in the case of the Bob Lazar report here, kudos to the Landsberg Police Department there in Michigan. It's a pretty small agency, I believe. But they responded to my request. I think I said 48 hours in my blog post, but that's just because I came into work the next day. They may have sent it that's within 24.
Wow.
And so I mean, they had completed the search and everything for me, sends it off, and I don't think, I know you relay it a lot on your show. I don't think people realize that it's people are very cordial to help you with it too.
Yes.
When you're reaching out, nobody's getting mad. That even at the state and local levels, there is somebody who that is their designated job.
Yeah,
is to do that.
And despite the frustrations on the federal level, and you're absolutely right, my record's about 14 and a half years waiting for documents. I was just talking about this, not on my program, but I was being interviewed on another one the other day. And I always want to remind people that there are humans on the other side of this. And despite the frustration of long wait times and so on, I do always try and appreciate the burden that they are under and the workload that they are under. And many of them do try and help you. And it's good and refreshing to hear that that is also true on the state level, that again, that is their job, is to do these acts of transparency, so to speak, and fulfill these requests. So tell everybody exactly then what you went after. I mean, obviously we're talking about Bob Lazar and the raid, but when you filed the request, how do you formulate that? What specifically are you asking for or going for?
Sure. Yeah. No, it depends on what I'm looking for in this particular case, because, what I knew about the FBI raid of Bob Lazar's business, United Nuclear Scientific, was from Jeremy Corbell's film, the documentary that was published last year. And so, I knew that something had happened there, and I had the address there. So I actually just asked for any police reports that they had from that particular business. Mm-hmm. I didn't put a crazy time frame. I want to say in the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
And so that's all I did. And that's typically all I did, when I'm using them in my other line of work. That's usually the first fishing expedition is you ask for a police report, which I always include, any supplementals, investigative notes, anything they can give you. And then depending on what you get back, I may also request, stuff like body camera footage, dash camera footage, all of this stuff is open records. And so you can request any of that. So it's kind of that broad first fishing thing. And you're right. Sometimes it's I haven't written anything about this, but I was able to get quite a few reports, and even the lab reports, from some cattle mutilations in Georgia recently, just because I had heard about this span of cattle mutilations. That's not common for us over here in the Southeast. And the sheriff's department that I dealt with there was great. They were like, "Oh, this would be fun to look up," and so they help search through everything and get them for you. And so I was able to get the pictures and everything, and in that case as well, each state is mandated. Georgia here, it's 3 days. They have 3 days to get it back to you.
Yeah.
So.
It's so mind-boggling to someone who only uses the federal FOIA, and I hear 48 hours you've got the documents in hand. It's very motivating for me because I've wanted to do this for many years and just have never had the time, but also it's overwhelming that instead of mastering one law that applies to all federal level agencies, to kind of get into 50 different laws at the state level. But it is very motivating for me to hear your side, to try and turn around and learn about this. Let me give some very quick context to what Bob Lazar's story is and why Tim went after these documents, for those that aren't aware. Now, this show is not served to tell the whole story about Bob Lazar. For those who want that, I highly recommend that you listen to my interview with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp on the Black Vault Radio. We went into great detail over the course of about 2 hours on Bob Lazar's story. But the quick overview is about 30 years ago, Bob Lazar came out, first started in silhouette with a pseudonym. George Knapp broke the story, but then later revealed himself to talk about essentially his work, and this is nutshell, but essentially his work at a facility known as S4, where he was responsible for taking part in back engineering alien spacecraft. One in particular, he said that there was multiple spacecraft there. Now, fast forward 30 years, Jeremy Corbell, filmmaker, created a documentary on Lazar. Now, needless to say, the Lazar story has been filled with controversy since day one. We don't have any hardcore proof. There are many things that go to really make you scratch your head and go, I wonder if this story is true. Then there's quite a few things that make you go, oh, come on, this is fabricated, this is fiction. There, again, lies a lot of controversy with this story. So Jeremy Corbell released his documentary on the Bob Lazar story last year. Now, in my interview with Jeremy, as I mentioned in the very beginning of this show, there was a part where the FBI and multiple government agencies raided the establishment of Bob Lazar. Now, this is United Nuclear Scientific Supplies, I believe is his full LLC name, or just United Nuclear as it is often referenced. And he sells chemicals. He sells some actually really cool stuff. So I would recommend, if you guys are science geeks like me, hey, take his story about Area 51 out of the equation and that controversy. He sells some really cool things. And so he, in the documentary, was raided during the filming of that documentary. Now, here's the controversy. The public story was always that they were looking for something, receipts, paperwork, but the kind of conspiracy here was that they were more so looking for element 115. This was the fuel or the power element that went into powering the flying saucer alien craft that they were back engineering. The conspiracy was that Lazar had snuck out element 115 and has kept it with him. When Jeremy Corbell asked him about element 115, it was, I believe, in the context of the documentary, it was, I think, like the next day he was raided. Now, Tim, thanks for allowing me to give a little bit of context there. I didn't want to talk too long, but that way we can get a little bit of context that in the documentary, it played out that he was raided. I will repeat again that the only reason I did not bring that up during my interview with Jeremy Corbell is out of respect for the fact that we weren't going to blow every part of his documentary prior to the release. So I agreed and agreed with him that we would not go into that because, again, I think he deserves for everyone to see some of those elements in his documentary and decide for themselves. Now that the documentary's been out for a while, now fast forward to Tim's role. He goes out, files the open records request, and in his blog, again, www.coyotestale.com, has now put the police report from the police department there locally in Michigan on his blog and talked a bit about what it entails. Okay, I'm done babbling there. Sorry, Tim, but I wanted to give everybody some background. So let me pass it back to you. You're the expert here. You're a law enforcement officer. It's only a 2-page report, but it's kind of a whopper. Tell everybody, what does it contain?
Okay. Yes. No. It was more than I expected. I mean, I will be honest with you. I went on a hunch when I had gone after it to the local PD, but because I was familiar as a law enforcement officer, that it is, it's common courtesy, professional courtesy for even federal agencies if they're going to do something in your jurisdiction to let you know about it, or for a host of different reasons, including liability or just necessity, you involve a local PD, at least on the peripheral, to assist. And so I, assumed that would have been the case with Landsberg PD, and it ended up being correct. And what they sent me is a report that is extremely common in law enforcement. I want to make sure everybody knows that because I don't want that to contribute to anything conspiratorial. It's what's called an agency assist. It's just where you document that this assistance you provided to somebody else. What I found intriguing, I wasn't expecting, was this agency assist report was extremely detailed. I mean, the officer, frankly, provided a lot more details than I'm ever accustomed to seeing these types of things. Usually it's, we were asked to help, we came, we saw, we left. But, I mean, there was a lot of backstory to this. And so the first thing is, it does indeed, there is a police report now, not that I ever had any doubts in terms of what Jeremy or anybody in the film, that the FBI had come to the business. I honestly never doubted that. That was never my intention of pursuing it. Mm-hmm. It was more just interest, what happened. And so it absolutely confirms that on July 19th, 2017, there was indeed a coordinated search of Lazar's business, United Nuclear Scientific. Now, thanks to the officer being very detailed, and I said in my blog, I'm not sure, Landsberg, not speaking bad about anybody, because Lord knows I wish I had worked in a small town department at times a sleepy hollow, but it's not a very large agency. It's not a very large area, so time may have lended itself to saying something wordy. And in fact, the FBI coming to town is probably a big event.
Mm-hmm.
Or, potentially the officer was kind of aware of who Bob Lazar was, and that, eventually somebody might come calling for it, and so they want to put lots of stuff in it. But it definitely details a lot of the things that I think were unknown prior to this report coming out about the entire raid. The first thing that I found most striking is that the report details the interaction between the FBI and the local agency there of the FBI's intent to conduct a search warrant at United Nuclear 2 days before they were going to do it. So, this is a coordinated event. This is not just happenstance, or I've heard different variations from it before this, that it was just going in to look at business records, or it was, the secret government coming in to search for element 115. But this was at least a coordinated event.
Let me ask you real quick. I don't mean to interrupt you. Is that bizarre? Does that stick out as abnormal, or is that routine?
No. I would say that was routine if you were going to be involved in a fairly, substantial operation.
Okay.
And yes, that is routine. I believe I've during my career worked with every federal law enforcement agency that exists, and including the Secret Service for all presidential administrations except for the current one. And so yes, no, they almost always come in, let you know what's going on, what their intentions are to do, and then ask for what assistance and everything. And so, yeah, that is not atypical for them to say that.
Okay.
Provided this is, like I said, some type of coordinated operation. When the FBI or the DEA or whoever is just going to go interview a witness or whatever, they don't tell anybody. They just go knock on doors. But this, definitely was a large scale coordinated event. Which is further confirmed in the report. But some of this is just inference because of it. I want to make sure I stress that, but it's based on my experience of just reading these reports, being a part of this type of stuff. The officer details kind of in the first paragraph after his first meeting on July 17th with the FBI that he checked the local police department's records for contacts with Lazar and discovered that they had no contact, in case anybody was curious, or his business. That little detail for me, just from experience-wise, I thought was interesting because we don't know the context of their conversation. But typically with something like that, the only reason that you're going to look and see what kind of past intelligence you have on somebody is because, is to check to see if there's any potential of threat for when you're going to do this search warrant. Do we have any localized information that maybe the FBI is unaware of or that we need to be aware of? So, could this be a concern for safety, whatever? And so I would say I interpreted that statement is to say that, whatever the conversation was, it was not a benign inquiry of, hey, man, we're going to go by here, try to get some sales records and, go from there. It was enough that made the officer want to check and document that checking. So that was the first thing that I thought was interesting. The other thing that the report kind of clarifies is something that I think has been ambiguously put out there but never really clarified, that the real crux of the FBI's search, their stated desire, was related to a homicide investigation that stemmed from, Houston, Michigan, I believe, that involved a poison. And so with that, I was able to kind of, you had a specific incident, and I was able to determine that they were referencing the 2015 death of a young woman, Janelle Stazell, who tragically died from thallium poisoning in December 2015. And so, the Houston Police Department had an open investigation here with the FBI and state police assisting. Now, Houston would be the primary agency. I know some people said, FBI doesn't investigate state murders. You're right. So, something. It was related to the poison. I mean, that is in the report, that this is the stemming event is this homicide investigation, and a young woman indeed was poisoned and tragically lost her life in 2015. Now, the other next thing that I found really interesting is the search warrant. The officer, notates that the warrant is for records and poisons that Lazar does sell. So, that right there, you have the records and poisons. So suddenly there was not just physical search records that they were interested in, but, actual physical property. Mm-hmm. Again, it's important to stress this is the, local police officer relating whatever was told to him. And so it can't be taken for the gospel of the FBI's intent, but it is suggestive that the FBI had some reasonable belief that there may have been illegal or banned toxic substances in the facility, mm-hmm. at his business. It's kind of further confirmed because in the report it describes that a hazmat team is going to be involved in this execution of the search warrant. And so the fact that you're bringing in a hazmat team clearly says that you have some kind of reasonable belief that some type of hazardous substance you're interested in is in there. Mm-hmm. And then, the report goes on through the next days where that's coming in where they, the actual day of the search, July 19th, where there's a pre-op briefing. The next detail that I found really intriguing, I'm really surprised it was in this police report, I'll be honest with you, is the officer describes the quote, surveillance team advising Lazar left his residence and arrived at the store around 9 a.m.
So they were watching him.
Yes, and I found that interesting. And what I'm kind of dancing around here is all of the actions being recorded in this report seem to suggest the FBI is treating Lazar as a suspect of something. You just don't, to give people any kind of frame of mind of the amount of resources they're involved in this kind of stuff. To have a surveillance team monitoring someone when they leave their home and then go to their business, you've either got to have two different surveillance teams stationary or one mobile that's following somebody. Mm-hmm. That in itself is resources, and there has to be a purpose for why. I could see why you would have somebody maybe at the business. So, he's opened up now, let's go. I don't know why you watch the house.
Okay.
Assuming that's correct. I mean, I don't know what the basis there. And again, it could just be a misinterpretation of what the officer was told or heard during this kind of pre-op briefing that's described. Mm-hmm. And so basically this will be a staging rally is what's going on, even though it's not stated in the report. Just for clarity for anybody who maybe is unfamiliar, is oftentimes there is some type of event where they're waiting on somebody or some type of condition before you go to search somewhere. So everybody's staged up, hanging around, waiting. Again, though, these are usually criminal investigations. I cannot think of any off the top of my head where it was just an investigative probe for witnesses or something of that nature.
Yeah.
But you've got surveillance following him, and so the report details that at some point after Lazar arrives at the business, a quote small group went in and spoke with him, and Lazar gave them permission to search. It's kind of another one of those details that I'm like, wow, why is this in the report?
Yeah.
The police lieutenant in me is kicking in, and the officer says the FBI also had a search warrant in case consent was not given. Okay, I mean, what that says is that saying no to the search was never a possibility. Yeah. Even though he could have legally.
But he gave permit. In fairness to Bob Lazar,
yes.
They didn't need to execute the warrant. He invited them in, essentially, and said, "Yeah, okay, come on in." Right? That's what we can deduce from all of this. Okay.
Yes.
And now, one thing in the film I want to ask you was the notion, and I believe Lazar himself said it, that they could have just done this with a phone call. They pick up and say, looking for records or whatever. But if you go to unitednuclear.com, that is the website officially for Bob Lazar's business. He's got, I mean, I'll just give you some of the categories of stuff that he sells: radioactive ore, radioactive isotopes, radiation shielding, anti-radiation pills. I mean, all sorts of, again, very cool things if you ask me. But from a law enforcement perspective, those are pretty dangerous things. I mean, he's only selling small things out to the general public. But obviously, if you're manufacturing these things or you're storing these chemicals, you're going to have them in much higher numbers than you would sell to Joe Blow in Southern California. So my question is, in the film, it was again question on why did they have to go in with this army of multiple agents and agencies and so on. With the environment that they were going into, does that make sense that they would have that army going in, or was that overkill in your opinion?
If they were going to conduct a physical search of the property, meaning not just sales records, and so then yes, that could be consistent with it. But no, I'm familiar with what you said. I think the implication was that these are just sales records they could have called and asked for, or just came in and said, "Hey, this is what we're investigating. We're looking for this. Can we get?" I mean, they could have got a material warrant for just those records.
Yeah,
but this was a search warrant, meaning, whatever it was, because the affidavit for that search warrant is still sealed. They had enough probable cause to convince a judge that a physical search of the property was warranted. Mm-hmm. So, if you were going to physically search any type of business or establishment that did deal with hazardous chemicals, materials that yes could be potentially dangerous, you would want to have a hazmat team that went in and said, "Hey, don't touch that, guys," or "Don't mess with that," to clear it for everybody's safety. So that absolutely would be consistent with a physical search of it, not just a record search.
Okay. Now let me ask you, because that's obviously the your expertise and background as a law enforcement officer. Let me ask you then more of a personal opinion question. Talk to me about how you approach this. I mean, again, the Lazar story is full of controversy. I'm not sure where you stand exactly on this. Were you going after records to prove or disprove anything, or just kind of see what you were going to find?
Just see what I was going to find. I want to make sure that I stress that. I never... It's just like, I can't reiterate enough. For me, this entire field, I think that a lot of people miss the fun in it, is the chase and the excitement of kind of what you can find, because everybody wants a conclusion. But I liken that to saying you're a football fan, but you only care if your team wins. They hoist the trophy, that's the end, but all the action and fun goes on in the middle of the game.
Yeah.
And so I like the game. I like watching that. And so I truly, kind of went in this completely, just objective and as detached as possible, with no, pre-existing opinion that I believed or disbelieved that this event ever happened, or that it happened in the scope of what was said. And so, I never went in there trying to do either one. It was more like, hey, let's see what we find out. And, let's where the chips may lie.
Yeah.
That's ultimately it kind of the report itself still finishes like that. That there is no definitive conclusion.
There's not. And I want to ask you what your personal takeaway is, to be fair and just for clarity's sake for those listening. And I know Tim has already alluded to this, even though that there was what appeared to be, surveillance, or what they're outlining in the report. There's no indication that he was a suspect in anything. To Bob Lazar's credit, they did not need to execute that search warrant. He invited them in. But the last line is interesting, and I want to make sure that I read this correctly. One of the last couple lines, it says, "At this time, RO," which is the reporting officer, right? RO just stayed outside of the business. Now, what I took from that is local PD went in to assist, and then when everything was cleared and the FBI went in officially, local police department just kind of backed off and played zero role, correct? So we really have no idea what the end result is. Do I read that? Okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And other than all these, little tidbits of details that throughout here, I can't stress enough, the local PD would have been very, very limitedly involved in any real understandings of what exactly the FBI was looking for, that kind of stuff. They would not have been involved in the search. They would not have been involved in any of that stuff. They really, typically local PDs are invited because people are familiar with the marked police cars, and so they stay on the outside, help with crowd control if that's necessary, or let people know, hey, this is a police thing going on. All these SUVs and people in jackets and everything. It's kind of a liaison, if you will, from the local community with what's going on. And so, and at the heart of it, even those local officers wouldn't have known exactly what went on inside the business.
It probably comes as no surprise. When I first saw this film and learned about the raid, I went after the federal documents. That FOIA case is still open. Obviously, I targeted the FBI when it came to that because obviously they were the key in the investigation. So for those of you who are curious, yes, there are open requests for those records by myself, and I'm sure probably quite a few others. So when those ever present themselves, I will definitely post them. But it is fascinating to see on the police department level what went on. And again, my kudos to you for digging these documents out. Let me ask you your personal takeaway from this after reading this document. And just to be clear, these 2 pages you posted are the only documents they have, right? Did they say that they're withholding anything, that there's more to come, or are these are it?
These are the only documents, and they're you can see on the report it says status closed, so it's open. Anybody else could put in their own request if they'd like and get them. Because I did a broad request and asked for any reports, I was given another report. I didn't publish that and won't because it doesn't pertain to anything. Actually, in this instance, Bob Lazar was a victim of identity fraud. I'll just leave it at that. I mean, it's not. It's and that report even stipulates that during checking, they realized, Bob Lazar's name, date of birth, that kind of stuff is on Wikipedia, and so it would appear that, unfortunately, somebody took advantage of his name and date of birth to be able to pass fraudulent checks, and I see. I got that, but didn't publish that. But yes, that's, they were very responsive. Like I said, they gave me exactly everything that they had. There's nothing else from Landsberg PD that they withheld. There's no active investigation on their part whatsoever.
Gotcha. Okay, so now you've seen the film. I'm kind of assuming there, but you've seen the film, right? Jeremy's film. Okay, so you've seen the film. You've seen Jeremy's reaction to this. You've seen Bob Lazar's reaction to this. Now you've seen the police department's documents on this. What is your personal takeaway? Do you think that there is a lot more to this story, or do you think that this was a routine search warrant executed? He was a voluntary, person said, come on in, and this was all routine. How do you walk away from this?
It's going to make everybody so upset to say that I could see evidence for either side that someone wants to believe. Now, I say that because let's go to the side that says this is strange. Why is the FBI doing this? There are aspects. I mean, even for a material search of something like this, there's aspects of it that are intriguing because we're talking about a major operation. This thing I understand is that, I would assume probably the closest FBI field office to there would be Detroit or Lansing. I mean, so we're talking about a lot of different people having to come from hours away. If they used a federal hazmat team or federal forensic people could have even flown in from D.C. So it's just a lot of people being brought in for this. So whatever they were hoping to look for, hoping to find or hoping to see, it would seem that they had some reasonable belief it was there. I mean, I don't know why you would extend that many resources. And I mean, you even see in that police report that they document,
a pre-op and post-op debriefing. I mean, so that, those are detailed events.
Yeah.
We gather everybody first, then afterwards to debrief. One of the things that I'll say that's just interesting is that, inarguably you have at least a 2-day coordinated event with multiple different pieces and everything. But according to the report, the actual search of the business lasted about 2.5 hours. I mean, that's not very. It's not very long if you're going to search for contraband, because typically people aren't going to have it on the shelves. That's not to say that they weren't quickly looking to see what, because I did check, and United Nuclear does sell thallium, which was the poison used in the earlier death of Janelle Stossel. However, what they sell is a benign fused kind of disc version of it. You couldn't. This is not the toxic sulfate substance that would have been used in her death. So, whether they at United Nuclear manufacture these discs there, and so I don't know. I have no idea there, and so it may have just been a quick check to see, what exactly. How much of this substance, which they had, although that is a banned substance. So if they'd had the thallium sulfate in there, that's illegal. But a 2.5 hour search, that's pretty short. I mean, if you think of the context of how many people are there.
Yeah.
And so it would be just so much conjecture on my part, but to say that in that quick of a search, it would appear that they already kind of knew what or where they were looking for something in the business, and it wasn't there. And I stress that enough because I think, just because the context of what this report suggests, I'm saying that they treated Lazar suspiciously because they surveilled him. They had a search warrant. They had that probable cause. However, nothing that I found says that Lazar ever broke any crime or had anything illegal. And clearly they didn't find anything because Bob Lazar is a free man today.
Yeah.
So, there is that. I want to make sure, because I know a lot of people have had that contention, well, here it goes and everything. I'm like, well, I don't want, I don't know the man, and aside from any of his UFO stories, it's not fair to him to take what was put in this report and suddenly make him out to be something he wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I don't want anybody to say that.
No, and that's why I wanted to kind of double clarify that even though there were suspect statements in here and details, that there's no indication that he was a quote-unquote suspect. Let me ask you one last thing about the raid. The 2.5 hour time frame, which it sounds like you feel is odd. Is it possible that there's no criminal connection to Bob Lazar, but is it possible that they went in there and actually found what they needed in regards to why they had the search warrant, whether it be the thallium that he had on the shelves and they were able to take a sample of that, or the receipts / documents / credit card records for whomever purchased it, that they were able to get that fairly quickly and then go, okay, well, we're done. I mean, it didn't look like a gigantic warehouse, at least in the film anyway. Is that a possibility that one day, once the federal level records are released, that they maybe just went in there and found what they were looking for?
Sure. No, it absolutely could. And it absolutely could have been, for whatever reason, whatever probable cause that they maybe had going into it, they could have thought the potential for more existed, but once they got inside, they realized, nope, this is going to be quick and easy, smooth. And yes, absolutely, that is very consistent with it and could have happened. I didn't put it in the blog, but I did uncover some stuff that were statements made publicly by someone who claimed to be an employee of United Nuclear the day after the raid. They were made on social media, and including a picture of Bob Lazar holding a sign with the date. And so, but some of the comments that they made in that social media post were definitely accurate in terms of law enforcement being interested in a murder investigation. Now, they disclosed some things in that social media post which had not been made public. It is accurate, and it is something that I don't think
they could have known unless law enforcement shared that with them.
Mm-hmm.
It pertains to the suspect of this crime. Very important to note that everything that I've seen, Janelle Sturzel's homicide is still unsolved. No one has been charged with that crime, and so a lot of from the FBI's end, in terms of what they might have taken out or were looking for and everything, all of that is not going to be available.
Yeah.
So everybody knows because it's an active investigation. But because of that, that in my opinion does suggest a more benign encounter between the law enforcement and everything once they got in there, between Lazar or the employees, than a more really intense type of search looking for something, thinking that Lazar's on the black market peddling stuff.
Yeah.
Because they shared that detail with that person, and they kind of unwittingly shared that in the public arena.
Online, yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up. That on the federal level, for everyone listening, is called Exemption B7. So using the example of me going after the federal level documents, the FBI documents, if they do consider all of those records pertaining to this raid as connected to that homicide investigation, and it's considered open, that they will potentially exempt all of the documents in their entirety under Exemption B7. I hope that's not the case. Maybe by the time they do process my request, which could be, years from now, that the case will be solved and closed, and then they'll be able to release it. But I am glad that you brought that up, because even though you request something, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it. Now, I know I'm taking a lot of your time. Here's my last question for you. From the raid, I would love to ask you, as a law enforcement officer, somebody who's trained to see when people are lying, when they're telling the truth. You've got a psychology background. Everything that you've seen about Bob Lazar, okay, not just the raid, but everything now in his story. Can I ask you that personal question? Do you find promise that his story is true, or are you leaning on the other side of the controversy that it is fiction, or are you in the middle?
Oh, man, what a good question, John.
I had to save it to the last one, so you didn't hang up on me.
No, man. I appreciate you asking me that. And I want to make sure that everybody knows, I say this expressly clear, I know no secret information of anybody else, and this is just my opinion. The Bob Lazar story, to me, is compelling. There are aspects of it that I believe are untruthful. Aspects of it that I think have been proven to be untruthful to the most part, namely the education background, that kind of stuff. Now, part of my background in law enforcement at one point in time was I was trained as a investigative behavioral analyst, which is the nice way for saying profiling, because a profiler, because profiling is not a really positive term in law enforcement nowadays, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And so I do have a lot of background and I was an interrogator for a while. So I do have a lot of background in behavior, watching people. And I'm limited, I want to make sure I say, I'm limited into what I see based on Bob Lazar's statements, because they're edited film versions, whether it's the interviews he's done, that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of the things that he categorically manifests that trump me, because he seems to be truthful. And it's such an extraordinary story, but there's aspects of certain things of how he retells some of these events and everything, more so I would say in Jeremy's recent documentary than maybe the media coverage 30 years ago, that I look at and go, man, if he was saying these same things and I was the one asking the question sitting in front of him, I wouldn't pick up on any deceptive behaviors. Does that mean that I believe him? No. And that's not a knock to anybody who does or doesn't. It's an extraordinary story. It's a fascinating story. And so, I guess I ended my blog post saying that the Bob Lazar raid is the epitome of ufology, and his story is the epitome of ufology for me personally. The last 8 years, the responses I saw even just in the past day after I posted my blog really confirmed, if anybody makes it to the end where I share my last sentiments on the whole thing and say it's the epitome of ufology, is the fact that I knew there was enough odd details in that report that some people were going to go, aha, it proves it. He does have element 115 or he did work there because there's all of this production. But at the same time, others were going to go, aha, this is all related to this criminal investigation. And so it always seems to end that way no matter what. It's always that both sides, there's never any definitiveness. I said in that post that I've come to look at the entire phenomenon like a reality generator, because two realities emerged even from this Bob Lazar report. And I have seen that in the discussions or comments or emails I have gotten since posting it, where people have viewed what I said one way. People, thank you for clearing it up. I knew this Bob Lazar was a hoaxer the whole time. I'm like, well, wait, I never said that. And I don't want to say that because I don't know that for a fact, and I refuse to say something that I'm not 100% confident on. Equally, I never said that it's true. He definitely. I would say, if you wanted my opinion on whether or not Bob Lazar ever, assumingly that he worked in a secret facility for the federal government, assuming that is true, the fact that he could have taken out some sort of extraterrestrial chemical or whatever seems very, very unlikely for me.
Yeah, I mean, agree with you there.
That's just, I think, I've said it before, you can't, we're talking about a facility that we already know that people have to be flown in and out of. I can't board a plane to fly to LA with a bottle of water. And so the thought that you could take some type of, potentially hazardous, if this was indeed, it's clear he's a smart guy. The chemicals you sell, everything he sells here, like you said, they're cool stuff.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable handling this kind of stuff, you probably wouldn't be comfortable, God, Lord knows how you'd have to smuggle something like that out.
Yeah, and on top of that, in my opinion anyway, just to add it very quickly, is the likelihood of them raiding a business 30 years after the fact ish. To look for that element, I think is I mean, why wouldn't they do this, 29 years ago kind of thing to try and search for it when the story was at its peak? But I think the bottom line for me, my takeaway from talking to you, is the controversy continues.
Yeah, yes, and that is the name of my blog, and that is how I ended it. Alas, the coyote escapes our grasp, and so it continues to excite the minds and everything, and hopefully, I did provide Jeremy Corbell some justification when you talked about the scope of a large scale raid going on. That did happen.
Yeah.
What they were looking for or why, that is
still a mystery.
It's still a mystery, and as long as people's beliefs are good and they're not hurting anybody and they don't take them away from all the great things going around them in life, to some extent, entertainment side of it can be a good thing, as long as you accept it as that, because I do believe it distracts from people, like myself, who really are very, very interested and in that pursuit. Namely, what kind of cool stuff can we find in the pursuit, even if we don't find UFOs?
Yeah.
What kind of discoveries can we make? So,
well, I know that my conversation with you has been fascinating for me personally, and I know those that are listening. I hope that this is not your only appearance on this program. For those listening who want to follow Lieutenant Tim McMillan's new blog, and I highly recommend you do so, you can do it at www.coyotestail.com. Now, of course, I will link everything that Tim and I talked about today, so you can see it at the show notes page. That's www.theblackvault.com/show notes. You're listening to episode number 29. Just find that. You'll see all the links, not only to Tim's blog, but a few other things that we have talked about. Tim, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know I kind of went over my allotted time with you, but it was really interesting to get your background. I really mean it. You are a role model for someone like my son. I do commend you for your work. Away from the Bob Lazar discovery that you made and away from that, I really do want to tell you how much I appreciate what you do. I mean, I know you hear that every day, but I'm a huge admirer of that. So thank you. But also more so, thank you for your time today and telling everybody about your work. And I hope that this is only the beginning and we hear a lot more from you.
Absolutely. Well, John, I reiterate all of those sentiments and proud to, like I said, I have no shame saying publicly I consider you a friend and respect everything you do. And absolutely, man. No, anytime you want to chat, and anyone's welcome. So the email links are on my sites and everything. Reach out to me. I have no problem. I like people, man. You learn lots of great things from people. So yeah, please, by any means, if I can help anybody, and I'm always willing to do that.
Very good. Well, thanks again, and thank you all for listening. This is John Greenewald Jr. signing off. We'll see you next time.